Well, I think it was 10 years ago, that my life as a interpretational prophet of Jehovah's Word had reached the zenith of its absurdity, but I was wrong. But I hope that now it has reached that zenith. So here is what we believe has occurred. All Passovers of Adam, because he's the one who can be killed by a Passover, must begin on Nisan 14 or ER 14, the late Passover. And they can last for one night, or they can last for 3 nights, because the blood was put on the left, right and right door posts and the lintel. And Nineveh's a walking distance of 3 days, and Elijah stretched himself over the widow of Zarephath's son 3 times. And Moses said to Pharaoh, I want to go and sacrifice 3 days in the wilderness. And there's plenty of witnesses to a 3-shot Passover, where the first one is the Passover of the firstborn of Pharaoh, sitting on the throne of Pharaoh, and the middle one is of the congregations, the hand mill, the maid grinding at the mill, and then the third one is of those in the prison holes, the disassociated ones. So there's a Passover of the Bethels, the head offices, the rulers of the watchtower, a Passover of the congregations, which is the women at the mill, and the Passover of those in the prison holes, which is the disassociated or disfellowshipped ones. And there was a Passover also of the Catholic Church in the first presence, when it became false. In Daniel 4, when it says, let 7 times pass over you, there are actually 7 Passovers of the watchtower people, 3 directly of the watchtower, 3 of Abraham, and 1 of Laodicea. But the way that God releases his people from slavery is through a Passover. And in the days of Egypt, it was a literal physical slavery to the Egyptians. But today it's not so physical, it's a spiritual slavery to a priesthood that's no longer representing God. It's being trapped in a false church. Although as a Jehovah's Witness you are pretty much a slave. There's lots of work they set you to do, which work is supposed to be for God but isn't anymore for God because they've become a false church. And that isn't so surprising, because all true churches in this system become false churches except for one, the church which I run, of course. But the only reason we don't become a false church is because we don't really get any opportunity to. Because we don't have any power or any money or any people of any number. And by the time we do get that, we get it for such a small amount of time and in such special circumstances that we don't really have an opportunity. So the reason we don't become a false church isn't because we're any better than any other group of Christians or Jews for that matter, or God's people. It's because we're all as bad as each other. All the mistakes the Jews made, the Christians make in a spiritual context, and we would have made them had we had the opportunity, but God denies us the opportunity out of his kindness and out of his brilliance, although it doesn't seem like us to be brilliance a lot of the time. But it is brilliance, it's just we can't see it. And ain't that the way with God? So what happened with the Watchtower is that they joined the United Nations knowing that it represented the throne of Satan. So they put the throne of Satan into the Temple of Jehovah by accepting UN rules. You don't do that. The UN can accept God's rules if it wants, but God's church cannot accept UN rules. It doesn't matter if you put God's throne in the UN, you can do that, but you can't put Satan's throne in the Watchtower, which is what they did. And they rode the beast of Revelation 13 and 17 as a harlot church, as a harlot woman, by getting on the back of the United Nations beast along with the Catholics and everybody else. So because they did that, you would have thought God would have removed their true church status the minute they did that, but such was his mercy, he didn't. He waited till they got exposed by the Guardian and gave them an opportunity to repent, which opportunity they failed to take. Instead they doubled down and said, oh, we've done nothing wrong. We just wanted to get a library book out, so we joined them to get a library card, which is absolute rubbish, because I went to the Millbank in those days when it existed, United Nations office in the UK, and I could borrow any book I wanted from the UN library without actually joining the UN. And I saw when I got there the signature of Sirio Aurelio or somebody who signed on behalf of the Watchtower to become a UN NGO. I mean, they are an NGO, but they became affiliated to the UN via that agreement, and that was their watchtower, putting the throne of Satan into the temple of Jehovah. Then when they were unrepentant for having done that, that's when God took away their water baptism. Because a water baptism is a baptism of repentance. You cannot possibly preside over a baptism of repentance if you yourself are not repentant for putting the throne of Satan in the temple of Jehovah, and for riding the wild beast of Revelation 13 and 17 as a harlot church. You can't do it. So God removed their water baptism on the date they wrote that letter, which was Heshvan 10, or possibly Heshvan 14, 2001, we can't work out which, 4 days later, because it says that the disgusting thing causing desolation has to be placed, and they sent that letter to all the Bethels, and how long it took before it sunk in, I don't know. Then you have the wonderful vision of Daniel 12 with the angel floating above the waters of the river and the bank either side with another 2 people, one on each bank, and one of the people on one of the banks says to the angel, how long is my bank, basically? And the angel says, well, it's 3.5 times. He says, a time times and half a time. He's basically in one meaning saying, how long is my bank? And that bank is the period when the watchtower remains a true church but has lost its river. It's the river bank. It's the period when you don't have a water baptism but you're still related to God. It's 3.5 years from 2001 Heshvan 14 actually to 2005 ER 14, 3.5 years later when they became a false church. So the length of the bank tells you when they became a false church from when they lost their water baptism. But there are 2 other ways of deducing 2005 ER 14. One is that you deny Jesus 3 times in the Passover night. In this night you will deny me 3 times. And if you do that, you get chucked out as a true church, because it was Peter who did that, who was to run the true church. Well, he ended up being the president of the first true church. They weren't appointed as the first true church actually until first fruits on Nisan 16. But he nonetheless prophetically denied Jesus 3 times in that night. And the watchtower did the same thing. Firstly, 94, 5, 6 and 7 actually, and 8, which was more than 3 times, but it was they're only held accountable for 6, 7 and 8 because I told them they'd be held accountable in 95, but there wasn't enough time for them to change anything then. So God held them accountable 6, 7 and 8. And they lost their exclusivity. I got appointed to feed 1 NC reserves, Heshvan 2 actually 1998, as a result of their 3rd screw up. But then they made 3 more Passover denials once they'd stolen my water baptism, and Laodicea held the Passover, because Laodicea had 4 governing body members supporting it and 5 against it, or the other way around, those being the numbers of Genesis 14. And they knew what it was doing, and they celebrated the Passover correctly on the ER 14 day, having celebrated the Watchtower one on Nisan 14. So 3 of those, after Laodicea was formed, is 2003, 4 and 5. So the 3rd Laodicean Passover that Laodicea got right but the Watchtower completely ignored was 2005 ER 14, and that's the 3 denials. So that's again a proof that the Watchtower became a false church, 2005 ER 14. There's yet an even more accurate proof, which is this. In 1 Kings 18, Elijah says, you go first because you're the majority to the prophets of Baal. Well, there were 450 of them. There were 100 prophets of Jehovah, and Team Jehovah had also Elijah, Obadiah and the attendant, making 103 of them. So the majority of 450 less 103 is 347. And you go first, so it's 347 days before Elijah went, and we know when Elijah went, it's when he wrote the Sign of Jonah letter, ER1 2006, starting the contest. That's when I started my contesting activities. 347 days before that, ER14 2005. So those are 3 proofs of why the Watchtower fell on that date, and the reason that's so important is that they feed the 5,000, they sit down in hundreds and fifties, according to Mark 5. And that's the number of years they had feeding till 2005 from 1911. Laodicea remained a true church even when the Watchtower fell. They stopped being a true church when they died to Adam, as we did. We lost all our appointments. That was 2012. That's over 100 years and under 101 years after 1911 Tishri 2, when they were appointed to feed. So there's their 100 years of feeding, sitting down in 150s. The 12 baskets of fragments are years, because good old Joseph interpreted a basket of bread as a day, and we know that Ezekiel and Moses take a day for a year. So they're years, and it's 12 years from 2005 ER14, except that a basket is a pre-made thing, so it's a calendar year. So they're agricultural years from Tishri 1. So they run from 2005 Tishri 1 to 2017 Elul 30, and it's not 13 of them. It's 12 full baskets, which means more than 12. 12 plus some amount, but not 13. So the last possible day of Watchtower feeding 5,000 1NC reserves, or actually having any food for any 1NC reserves, would be Elul 30 this year. And we're now at Tammuz 17. So they have to stop feeding the 1NC reserves in the next 73 days. So there's one proof that the Passovers of the Watchtower must be this year, because it's no good if they're next year, they've already stopped feeding. And since Passovers must be Nisan or Iyar, and since they must be maximum of 3 months long, the Passover must have been completed on Tammuz 14 in the Watchtower, which is why I say we've reached the zenith of our absurdity, because I'm saying not only will there be nuclear bombs this weekend, but the Watchtower has in fact been passed over. 100,000 Jehovah's Witnesses have been killed by a Passover execution, but it's only one per congregation. So any one Watchtower congregation will not think there's anything special that one of their older people died, an older man died, on Tammuz 14, which was the Sabbath, on Saturday morning about midnight, about 1 a.m. actually. That's nothing special. One of the older people in the congregation died. But what's special is that in every congregation of every Jehovah's Witness congregation throughout the whole world, and there are over 100,000 of them, the same thing happened. So if the Bethel did an analysis, or if Laodicea does an analysis of reports of people having died, they will see that pattern, but no one congregation would see it easily. Nonetheless, it's there, if I'm right, and because the Passover must have occurred. The other reason it must have occurred is the 11 times of Abraham's times, which is 3960 years, and it starts from 1943, Nisan 14. It takes you to Laodicean Passover 2018, Nisan 14, when Abraham starts possessing the kingdom. Laodicea is Abraham, they're non-Adamic, Abrahamic, and they start getting people and they get reappointed as a true church 2018, Nisan 21, and then they start possessing the kingdom. So there's the demise of the Watchtower, and that's why there has to be a Passover, and the third Watchtower Passover has occurred, which is actually of those in the prisons, and it's the late Passover of those in the congregation. There is one more Passover day, Ab 14, which is the late Passover for the disassociated and disfellowship, but that does not apply to people who are presently Jehovah's Witnesses. So the witness congregations have finished their Passover, and Pharaoh releases his people. Well, he actually releases God's people, the saints. He releases them after the Passover, after Tammuz 14. Then they have this cakes period where they rush to escape when they're still in Egyptian-controlled Sinai, and then they get to Sukkoth on Tammuz 22, and it was Nisan 22 in 1513, which means booths. And I think that's either when we see the spies or when we see Laodicea. I'm not sure, but I think hopefully we see the spies before then. So that's where we are. The Passover this year is delayed 3 months because it's a 3-month Passover from Nisan, and the whole pattern is delayed 3 months in the escape from the Watchtower, which is quite appropriate because it's actually, well, there was the Egyptian escape. The Babylonian escape wasn't a Passover because Cyrus just let them go with a decree. The Roman Catholic Church escape was a Passover. I don't know whether the escape from the law was a Passover. I mean, the escape from the law actually occurred when Jesus died. Arguably it was. So the Egyptian will be the first, leaving the law is the second, leaving the Catholics the third, and leaving the Watchtower the fourth. So Nisan, Iyar, and Tammuz. Makes sense? So right now, the Laodiceans, well, here's the other thing. Nineveh becomes overturned, according to Jonah, and I thought that was the Watchtower, but it's not, it's Laodicea. It's a city of walking distance 3 days, which is the 3 Passovers. That's the entirety of its length. It's the reappointed Laodicea. And there's 120,000 saints in that church now who don't know their left hand from their right. They don't know whether they're 1NC or 2NC saints. Because here's the beautiful symbolism that took us forever to understand. The Jews crossed the Red Sea on the dry land with a wall of water either side on their left and their right. Now, a wall of water is a law and a water baptism. But there were two walls, which is two laws, and there were two water baptisms. So there's the 3EC water baptism and their law of Russell, of the descended Russell, and then there's the 4EC water baptism of moi and our law of this church. Two walls, two waters, two walls of waters, which is the two congregations, Judah and Ephraim. And the dry land between the two is Laodicea, where they actually come across on. And the 120,000 in there are saints. They're 1NC reserves, they're 2NC kings, and there are 2NC lords, overlords, heavenly baptized lords, who don't know whether they're 2NCs or 1NCs or what they are. Although you'd have thought the 1NCs would know with Russell there. But I don't know the level of their interaction. But that's the symbolism. It's this incredible situation of two different water baptisms and two laws, going to make a Zoar, the mountains of Ararat, with two administrations. Just as Jerusalem has two mountains in it, Zion and Moriah, so there are two churches that combine into one, into Zoar, at this Passover. So it's the interaction between those two churches which have been separated by Satan. Actually not so much, well, initially by Satan, now it's the dragon more, I think, that we look forward to. When the reaper and the sower unite and rejoice, according to John 4, we are the sower in research terms, and they reap our research, and they are the sower in evangelical terms, and we reap their congregation. And the whole thing is delayed until now, and we've been very frustrated by that delay, because I, for one, work better in a group of people than I do by myself. We all do, I think. And I've had precious few people helping me out, been unable to do the real research I'd like to do with a good, bunch of people helping me out. So the research has suffered, and man has failed to properly decode the scriptures. And likewise, that we haven't got a good message out to people, so the evangelism hasn't worked very well. But the good side of all this is that the Lord's witnesses, and me in particular, have looked like no threat to anybody because we're so small and nobody listens to us and we get everything wrong. We look like we do. And the Watchtower, Satan's got them because he's got demon-possessed people on the governing body, and everybody in Watchtower worships the governing body. So there's no reason for Satan, well, not for Satan nowadays, for the dragon to do anything hasty right now, because he's got everybody where he wants them. And what God does is he gets people from one part of the Watchtower to another part, Laodicea, which doesn't bother the dragon too much, and he gives us a whole bunch of ideas that don't predict anything correctly, which doesn't bother anybody too much, and it looks like the dragon has nothing to worry about. And only at the very, very last minute, after everything is sorted, does he join the two up, and then the dragon goes, oh dear, we've got something to worry about. Then the Great Tribulation, World War III, nuclear bombs, blah, blah, blah. So mankind is kind of protected from a reaction to the success of God's people by Jehovah delaying that success until it's too late for any reaction to have much effect, which is a kindness to everybody. Because when the dragon realises it's lost this game, it'll do what Pharaoh has tried to do and kill all God's people. Pharaoh, when the Africans realised that the whites, who they had enslaved, had escaped, they'd let them go because God killed all their firstborn. The Africans then tried to genocide all the white people. I put it in those terms because of the politics going on at the moment, to point out that it's not just the white man who enslaved the black man. The original one was the other way around, actually. But it was just Satan. I can't have them, nobody can have them. And so they tried to kill them all. And that will happen again. They won't succeed, because Pharaoh didn't succeed. And God will protect his people today as he did before. But one of the ways he does that is by delaying the escape till the last possible minute. So that's a reason why this whole thing has taken longer than we ever thought it would. In an hour that you do not think to be it, the Son of Man is coming. So that's about it. So we expect to see something from the spies prior to Tammuz 21-22, and we expect to see Laodicea, Tammuz 21-22, at the end of Capes, when they reach Succoth. And we've got fire signs now on Tammuz 21, which is the 88th contest Pentecost from 2006 ER1. It's 4,400 BLC days from 2006 ER1. And also on Tammuz 24, which is the 95th Barnean Pentecost from 2005 ER14, the fall of the Watchtower. It's 4,750 BLC days after that. So these are the next two Pentecosts when we expect two fire signs. We expect the UK fire sign on July 6-7, which is the Sabbath, which is Tammuz 21. And we expect the American fire sign on July 9-10, which is Monday, Tuesday, which is Tammuz 24. And that's the latest prediction, the 34th extension. And thanks for listening.